September 11th, 2001. A date that changed everything. Nearly 3,000 innocent lives were lost in a single morning, and an entire nation stopped breathing. The towers fell, the Pentagon burned, and America woke up to a new reality. But this video isn't about that day. It's about what came after. The part that didn't make front-page headlines. The financial machinery that kicked into gear while the dust was still settling. Today, we're following the money. Not conspiracy theories, not speculation, but cold hard numbers from government reports, congressional investigations, and corporate financial statements. Because when you trace the dollar bills, a very different story emerges about the war on terror. A story about how tragedy became a trillion-dollar industry. I'm going to walk you through 20 years of financial data that most people never see. We'll examine who got rich, how they did it, and what it cost the rest of us. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some people call September 11th the most profitable disaster in modern history. But fair warning, what you're about to learn might change how you see everything that happened afterward. Let's start with the immediate aftermath. In those first weeks after the attacks, something remarkable happened across America. Flags appeared on every porch. Patriotic songs dominated radio stations. People lined up at military recruiting stations, ready to serve their country. The unity was real, and it was powerful. But while Americans were coming together, something else was happening behind closed doors in Washington. The federal government had just written itself the largest blank check in history. Within months of September 11th, Congress approved massive spending increases with minimal debate. The urgency of the moment meant oversight took a back seat to action. President Bush declared that the war on terror would not end until every terrorist group of global reach had been found, stopped, and defeated. That open-ended mission statement became the foundation for decades of unlimited spending. The defense budget, which had been relatively stable during the 1990s, suddenly exploded. New agencies appeared overnight. The Department of Homeland Security became the largest government reorganization since World War II. The Transportation Security Administration hired tens of thousands of workers. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence coordinated 17 different intelligence agencies. Each new department needed equipment, facilities, and most importantly, contractors. The money didn't stay in Washington. It flowed like a river to private companies promising to make America safe again. Halliburton, Bechtel, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and hundreds of smaller firms lined up for contracts. Many of these deals were negotiated under emergency procurement rules that bypassed normal competitive bidding processes. The Afghanistan invasion made sense to most Americans. That's where al-Qaeda trained. That's where Osama bin Laden was hiding. The connection was clear and direct. But less than 2 years later, the crosshairs shifted dramatically. Suddenly, the mission wasn't about finding bin Laden anymore. It was about Saddam Hussein and Iraq. The Bush administration claimed Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and maintained operational ties to al-Qaeda. Both claims later proved false. The 9/11 Commission report explicitly stated there was no operational relationship between Saddam Hussein and the September 11th hijackers. But by then, public opinion had been shaped, and the invasion machinery was already in motion. What most Americans didn't see were the energy company maps of Iraqi oil fields circulating in Washington think tanks. They didn't know about the reconstruction contracts being drafted before the first bomb fell. The defense industry had already rewritten their business projections based on a prolonged occupation. When the Iraq invasion began in March 2003, it became the testing ground for everything the new war on terror economy promised. Unlimited budgets, minimal oversight, and guaranteed profits. It was the perfect storm of politics, fear, and business opportunity. The financial floodgates opened completely once combat operations began. Halliburton's subsidiary, Kellogg Brown and Root, known as KBR, became the poster child for wartime profiteering. They secured something called log-cap contracts, which stands for Logistics Civil Augmentation Program. These were cost-plus deals that guaranteed profit margins on top of whatever they spent. Think about how that works. If a convoy burns twice as much fuel as planned, that's not a problem for the contractor. The government pays for the extra fuel plus a percentage on top. If a construction project runs over budget, that just means more revenue. The more they used, the more they earned. It was a system designed to reward inefficiency. KBR took over everything from feeding troops, to delivering fuel, to building military bases. Bechtel handled reconstruction of power plants and water treatment facilities. Raytheon and Lockheed Martin filled order books for smart bombs and missiles that cost more per unit than most people's houses. Private security firms like Blackwater signed contracts worth billions. Every crisis became a business opportunity. Roadside bomb damage is a convoy that creates demand for armored vehicles and new security contracts. Power grid gets sabotaged? That means more reconstruction work. The cycle was self-sustaining and incredibly profitable. Oil played a crucial role that often gets overlooked. Iraq holds the 5th largest proven petroleum reserves on Earth. Before the 2003 invasion, those fields had been closed to Western investment for decades due to international sanctions against Saddam Hussein's regime. After the occupation began, companies like BP, Shell, and Halliburton's Oil Services Division gained access through new production sharing agreements. Officially, this was about stabilizing global energy markets and helping Iraq rebuild its economy. In practice, it opened one of the world's richest petroleum frontiers to private capital right in the middle of a war zone. The timing was remarkable. By 2004, the war effort wasn't just a military operation anymore. It had become an economic engine. Wall Street investors started treating defense contractors like a growth sector. Stock prices for companies with major military contracts doubled, and in some cases, tripled. The government kept borrowing money it didn't have to feed this machine. Inside Iraq, billions were allocated for reconstruction projects, but audits later revealed that very little actually reached the Iraqi people it was supposed to help. The Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction documented countless examples of projects that were abandoned half-finished, equipment that simply disappeared, and entire warehouses full of supplies that nobody could account for. Meanwhile, something disturbing was happening with the taxes on all this profit. Under special rules for overseas contractors, billions of dollars in earnings were sheltered from U.S. income taxes. American employees working for companies like KBR didn't pay federal income tax on significant portions of their salaries. The corporations themselves used offshore subsidiaries in places like the Cayman Islands and Dubai to shelter even more. So while all this money was flowing to private companies, American soldiers on the ground were still riding in under-armored Humvees. They were welding scrap metal onto their vehicles just to survive roadside bombs. That disconnect told you everything about where the priorities really lay. The reconstruction story gets even more disturbing when you look at specific examples. Power plants that appeared as completed projects in official reports were actually just concrete foundations. Schools that existed on paper turned out to be empty lots when you visited the GPS coordinates. Roads crumbled faster than they were built because contracts were written for completion, not durability. The irony was impossible to ignore. America called it nation building, but most of the nation being built was back home in corporate boardrooms and stock portfolios. Iraqi citizens weren't partners in reconstruction. They became props in a trillion-dollar performance for American audiences. Let me give you some real numbers to put this in perspective. From 2001 to 2020, total defense and homeland security spending increased by more than $9 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To understand how much money that is, consider that the entire U.S. gross domestic product in 2001 was about $10 trillion. Halliburton and KBR earned over $50 billion from their logistics contracts alone. Bechtel took in billions more for reconstruction projects, many of which were never completed. Private security companies like Blackwater signed government deals worth nearly $3 billion before the decade was out. Before September 11th, the United States spent approximately $300 billion per year on defense. Within 10 years, the figure had nearly tripled, and it never came back down. Today's Pentagon budget exceeds $800 billion annually, larger than the next 10 countries combined. When you add in veterans' medical care, disability payments, and interest on the debt used to finance these wars, the total cost of post-9/11 military operations is projected to exceed $8 trillion. That doesn't even count the ongoing costs we'll be paying for decades. The human cost was even more staggering. Nearly 15,000 American service members and contractors were killed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and related operations. Hundreds of thousands of civilians died in the crossfire. Millions more were displaced from their homes. Every single one of those lives was worth more than every contract, every bonus payment, every speech about freedom and democracy. We told ourselves we were bringing democracy to Iraq, but most Iraqis never asked for our version of it. What they wanted was basic security, reliable electricity, clean water, and a chance to live without fear. Instead, we gave them a system built on paperwork and profit margins. 2 decades later, the same revolving door keeps spinning. Generals retire and become defense consultants. Consultants become lobbyists. Former Pentagon officials join corporate boards, and the budgets keep growing, regardless of which party controls Congress or the White House. The enemy may have changed from Al-Qaeda to ISIS to great power competition with China and Russia. The headlines change, but the underlying business model stays exactly the same. There's always a new threat that requires more spending, more contracts, and more profits for the same companies. This isn't about being unpatriotic or failing to support our troops. The men and women who served in these conflicts showed incredible courage and dedication. They believed they were fighting for something larger than themselves. But they deserved better than being used as justification for a system that enriched a small group of corporations while failing to achieve its stated objectives. The real tragedy isn't just the money that was wasted or the lives that were lost. It's the opportunity cost of what else that $8 trillion could have accomplished. Imagine if even a fraction had been spent on infrastructure that doesn't collapse, schools that actually prepare kids for the future, healthcare that doesn't bankrupt families or care for the elderly who built this country. Think about the bridges that are falling down across America while we spent more on military contractors in Iraq than on domestic infrastructure. Consider the teachers who are leaving the profession because they can't afford to live on their salaries, while private security contractors were making six-figure incomes in war zones. The pattern reveals itself when you follow the money trail. September 11th created a crisis that demanded immediate action. That crisis was used to justify unlimited spending with minimal oversight. Private companies captured most of that spending through no-bid contracts and cost-plus arrangements. The profits were enormous and largely tax-free. And the cycle continues because there's always a new crisis that requires the same solution. The system has created perverse incentives where companies profit more from problems than solutions. When your revenue depends on instability, you don't have much motivation to create lasting peace. When your contracts pay you based on how much you spend rather than what you accomplish, efficiency becomes your enemy. The defense industry has become what economists call a rent-seeking economy. Instead of creating value through innovation or productivity improvements, it extracts value from taxpayers through political connections and government contracts. The bigger the perceived threat, the bigger the contracts. The more unstable the world becomes, the more profitable it is for this industry. Looking back now, it's clear that September 11th marked a turning point in American economics, as much as American foreign policy. It normalized the idea that private companies should profit from public tragedies. It established the precedent that emergency spending doesn't require normal oversight or accountability. The war on terror became a template that's been applied to every crisis since. The 2008 financial crisis led to massive bailouts for the same banks that caused the problem. The COVID pandemic created enormous profits for pharmaceutical companies, while small businesses went bankrupt. Each crisis follows the same playbook: public risk, private profit. What makes this particularly frustrating is that we had alternatives. The money spent on military contractors could have funded a massive infrastructure program that would have created jobs and improved security more effectively than any foreign intervention. The resources devoted to building bases in Iraq could have been used to rebuild American cities. The technological innovations that came from defense spending could have been directed towards solving climate change, curing diseases, or advancing space exploration. Instead, we got better ways to kill people and more efficient methods of surveillance. The psychological impact of this system extends beyond economics. When citizens realize that their government is more responsive to corporate donors than to voters, it undermines faith in democracy itself. When young people see that the biggest profits come from weapons and war rather than education and healthcare, it shapes their view of what America values. This isn't about left versus right politics. Members of both parties have supported the system and profited from it. Defense contractors donate generously to Republicans and Democrats alike. The revolving door between government and industry operates regardless of which party is in power. The solution requires acknowledging that we've created a system that profits from perpetual conflict. As long as the most powerful companies in America make more money from war than peace, we shouldn't be surprised that we keep finding ourselves in conflicts that seem to go on forever. Real security comes from having a strong economy, good infrastructure, educated citizens, and allies who respect us. None of those things require spending more on defense than the rest of the world combined. None of them require permanent military bases in dozens of countries. None of them require treating every international problem as a nail that needs to be hit with a very expensive military hammer. The first step toward change is understanding how we got here. September 11th was a genuine tragedy that demanded a response. But the response we chose enriched a small group of companies while failing to make America or the world more secure. More than 20 years later, we're still paying the price in both dollars and lives. The numbers don't lie. $8 trillion spent, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, entire regions destabilized. The same companies that profited from the chaos are now positioning themselves to profit from whatever comes next. Whether it's a new conflict with Iran, a Cold War with China, or another domestic crisis, the same playbook is ready to be deployed. Understanding this history does not diminish the sacrifice of those who served or the grief of those who lost loved ones. If anything, it honors them by demanding that their service and sacrifice be used for something better than corporate profits. They deserved leaders who would use their courage and dedication to build a more secure and just world, not to enrich defense contractors. The story of money and the war on terror is ultimately a story about choices. We chose to respond to terrorism with unlimited military spending rather than addressing the root causes of extremism. We chose to prioritize corporate profits over soldier safety. We chose to rebuild Iraq while letting American infrastructure crumble. Those were choices, not inevitable outcomes. They were made by specific people for specific reasons, and they can be unmade by different people making different choices. but only if enough Americans understand what actually happened and demand something better. The money trail from September 11th to today reveals uncomfortable truths about how our political and economic systems really work. It shows that when crisis strikes, those with the most political connections and the best lobbyists position themselves to profit while ordinary Americans pay the bills. This pattern will repeat itself until we change the fundamental incentives. As long as crisis equals opportunity for a small group of well-connected companies, we'll keep having crises. As long as war is more profitable than peace, we'll keep finding excuses for war. Almost 25 years after September 11th, it's time to ask whether we got what we paid for. Did $8 trillion make us safer? Did permanent war bring us peace? Did enriching defense contractors strengthen our democracy? The answer to all these questions is clearly no, but it's not too late to choose a different path. We can honor the victims of September 11th and the veterans of subsequent wars by building the kind of country they would be proud of. One that chooses peace over profit, infrastructure over interventions, and the common good over corporate greed. The money trail ends here, with each of us deciding what kind of America we want to build going forward. Because when you follow the money, the numbers don't lie. But what we do with that knowledge is up to us. This is just one piece of the bigger picture. Subscribe if you want to understand the full context and how to better protect yourself in uncertain times. And the video on screen takes this story one step further.